Imagine this. You are sitting around during a media training session, and the media trainer has just asked a question, a difficult one. You didn't have a great answer for it. And so you and your colleagues sit around for the next 15 minutes or so brainstorming, well, how should we answer that question? And then the media trainer cuts in and says, if you'll pardon me for a moment, can I just ask you for my own knowledge, what's the real answer to that question? And then the media trainer says, why don't you just say that? That scene plays out regularly in our media training workshops. And I'm not so naive as to think that every answer can be that simple, but a lot of them are. And the ones that aren't that simple also have good, clear answers. And that's what we'll be working on today, talking about the 10 difficult questions reporters ask and how to answer them. My hope is that regardless of what you're asked, you feel empowered by the end of this webinar to be able to answer those questions credibly, authentically, in a way that feels honest and true, both to you and the reporter and their audience that you're communicating with. By way of introduction, my name is Brad Phillips. I was formerly a broadcast journalist with ABC News and CNN. For the past 15 years, I've been a full-time media trainer and public speaking trainer. We offer open enrollment classes and custom workshops, and we've trained tens of thousands of people over that time across many different industries. And what I'll say is that most of the tips that we'll offer today cut across all of those industries. Now, there will obviously be distinctions as you get to different industries, sectors, audiences you're communicating with, but a lot of what we'll talk about today really holds true for the broad array of communicators that are likely watching this. Let's begin with number one. The first difficult question reporters ask is the question to which you don't know the answer. Now, in a print interview, this one's pretty easy. You could just say, I don't know, but I will find out and get back to you. If it's a live interview, saying I don't know is a little bit trickier, so that brings us very quickly to question number two, the specific detail question. Now, for this example, I'll think about an oncologist. Let's say it's a doctor specializing in lung cancer, and this physician is doing a live interview, maybe on the radio, and the host says, Doctor, can you tell me how many Americans died of lung cancer last year? And the physician doesn't know the answer to that question. There's two things the physician can do. One is say, I really don't know. The problem with that is it just kills the conversation dead in its tracks, and it might also take a small hit at the physician's credibility. There's another approach that the physician could take, and that is to say, I don't know X, but I do know Y, and here's how this might play out. Doctor, do you know how many Americans died of lung cancer this year? I don't know the specific number, but here's what I can tell you. The number of people dying of lung cancer each year has been trending downward, and it has been for several years. And there's a couple of main reasons for that. First of all, people continue to smoke less, and the answer goes on. So in doing that, the physician managed to keep the conversation alive, add value to the answer, but very importantly, stop short of bluffing or pretending to know information that the physician did not know. Question number three, the not in my lane question. This comes up a lot where I will be working with a subject matter expert of some sort, let's say an economist who represents a bank or a financial institution. And during the course of the interview, this might be happening over the phone in a print interview, the reporter says, hey, by the way, I heard that two of your senior leaders at that financial institution recently left, and it seems like they might have been pushed out. Can you comment on that? Now, the economist is really not the best person to be commenting on changes in senior leadership. And while it sounds obvious for that person to get the advice to stay in their lane, the truth is that that's one of those things that is much easier said than done. When the pressure of an interview is in progress, when the camera's on and there's a reporter looking at you and maybe a camera person looking at you, maybe some people from your own organization looking at you, I think people have this inclination to want to please the reporter, to want to demonstrate their credibility. And so they give an answer to a question they probably shouldn't have. obviously that's problematic. So stay in your lane as the strategy means this. As an economist, what I look at every day is the numbers and what they mean for our clients. I'm not privy to all of the decisions made at the senior leadership level, and for that, I would have to refer you to other people within our company. So that is a way that a person can retain their credibility, give an answer that's logical. Look, I'm not the right person, and prevents them from rushing forward to give an answer that may do more harm, probably will do more harm than good. Number 4, the speculation question. Imagine that a major storm has just cut through a community, knocking down trees, knocking down power lines, and the power's out. You're a spokesperson for the utility company. And of course, reporters are going to be asking the number one question, when do you expect the power to come back on? Now, this is a dangerous question because if typically it takes you, let's say, 3 hours to restore power, at least to the most important places like nursing homes and hospitals where lives are at stake, but this time it takes you more, suddenly speculating or invoking how long it typically takes can be used against you when that timeline comes and passes without power having been restored. So the way to handle speculative questions is to bluntly say, I can't speculate. Here's what I can tell you is happening right now. Crews are on the ground. We are sending crews to the highest priority areas, which are, and list those, and then talk about the commitment you have to bringing on power to everybody else, bringing in backup crews from other communities to come in and help, that you have no greater priority than to restore the power for everybody, that you have a hotline set up so that people can call and report what they're seeing if they have down power lines. So at least that way you're giving people a to-do item to empower them with something they could do as power is out. But one thing you never want to do when you're asked a speculative question is commit to something that's not entirely within your control and then be proven wrong. Number 5, the competitor question. For this one, I'd like to give a little bit of additional context. Think for a moment about the earliest recorded forms of human storytelling. One of the most famous ones, are cave drawings. And if you think about what our ancestors were drawing on caves those millennia ago, a lot of it was things along the lines of man versus beast, things that had conflict embedded in the story. Our brains seem to be hardwired to appreciate or have a proclivity toward conflict. So it is natural, if you are with Pepsi and you're about to release a new product, that a reporter is going to say, do you think you can cut into Coke's market share? And you always have to ask yourself a question. There are times that the upstart company might want to actively go against their larger competitor if they decide in advance that that could do them some good. But a lot of times, it's not always an intentional act when people start commenting on their competitors. And the problem from the standpoint of a spokesperson is that, do you want that one quote that you might get in that print article to be about you versus that competitor? Or do you want it to be primarily about your product, your new idea, proactively making the case for why that product is better? So when you're asked a question about a competitor, one of the things you can do is say, I'm going to let them speak for themselves. Here's what we're focused on. And much similar to stay in your lane, you don't have to comment on what your competitor is doing just because the question is asked. Question number 6, the accusatory question. During our media training workshops, I'll often ask a half a dozen who, what, when, where, why questions to a client. And then that 7th question, I'll throw a zinger at them, something that they didn't expect, something that may accuse them of having done something wrong. And it's amazing to watch what usually happens. At the very least, there's some kind of visible change in their facial expression. And in some of the more extreme circumstances, you see people physically push back into their chair, often crossing their arms and their legs, really protecting their bodies from the challenge of the question. And a lot of the time, rather than defending against the accusatory question, I advise that people lean right into it, push back hard against the insinuation buried within the question. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're a city council person or a mayor. You preside over an almost $300 million annual budget. And the reporter from some local station, an intrepid investigation reporter notices a $5,000 line item in your budget for spending $5,000 in party supplies and catering for a single party. And you know how these things play out. Your local newscast says, next on News 7, an investigation, your tax dollars at work, $5,000 in party supplies. And this sounds like suddenly you as a politician are scandalous, unethical, someone who is mismanaging public funds and should be forced out of office. Now, that may seem like an unusual time for you to push back hard when constituents may be enraged by the setup of that story. But here's how that could play out. Let's say the reporter is in a parking lot and chases you down and puts a microphone in your face. The question is, Mr. or Mrs. Councilperson, why are you asking taxpayers to foot a $5,000 expense for party supplies? Shouldn't that money be spent on crucial programs and services elsewhere? So this is one of those cases where you could very easily see somebody sputtering and very anxious. But here's how I'd like to see that person answer the question. $5,000 couldn't possibly be a better investment. What that program you're referring to is at-risk youth who formerly went through the program are mentoring at-risk youth in our community today. As a result of this program, people in our community that for too long have been forgotten or left behind have a better chance of completing high school, a better chance of going to college, a better chance of getting high-paying jobs for the rest of their lives. And when you see what happens in that room when we acknowledge the tremendous strides those young people have made, you probably would look at it and say, $5,000 isn't enough. You should be spending more to acknowledge what they did. So that's why we're spending that money, and I would invite members of the community to participate in this program and witness for themselves why this is such a great use of taxpayer funds. You can see in that moment how the story completely flips, because rather than defending for a second, you instantly grab the accusation and turn it on its head. Question number 7, the guarantee question. The problem with any kind of guarantee question is that if somebody says to you, can you guarantee that X will not happen again? There's virtually nothing I can think of in life where you could guarantee anything. That's one of the certainties of life, is the uncertainty of life. But if you're a spokesperson asked to give some sort of guarantee and the answer to the question is there are no guarantees in life, or I can't guarantee it, but that could become the only quote in the news story. So can you guarantee that another child won't get hurt at your summer camp? I can't guarantee that. But what I can tell you is, suddenly your local paper writes a story that talks about the injury that a camper sustained and says, when asked whether they can guarantee this wouldn't happen again, quote, I can't guarantee this won't happen again, period. And there goes enrollment at your summer camp. So now that we know that guarantee questions are problematic and you can't guarantee the outcome, what you can guarantee is a process. And to show you what I mean, let's look at the example of Chipotle that a few years ago suffered in their restaurants an E. coli outbreak that made dozens of people sick. Their stock price dropped by double digits. Stores were closed. About a year afterwards, Steve Ells, the founder of Chipotle, went on an NPR podcast. And he was asked about this, and I'm going to show this on the screen, but just in case somebody is listening and not watching the webinar, I'm going to read this out loud just to make sure everybody captures the exchange. Steve Ells: what we realized is that we needed to develop protocols to prevent any kind of pathogen from coming into the system. The host says, which is impossible to do 100% of the time, right? So that's basically a guarantee question. Ells: you can never say 100%, but you can get very close to zero. Okay, so he acknowledges in that answer that you can't say 100%, but you can get very close to zero. I don't mind the way that he phrased that. It's not like, well, there are no guarantees in life, which almost is flip. It's saying you can never say 100%, which the phrasing of in and of itself suggests there's a but coming. So you almost, as a reporter, have to run the second part of the quote. Ells continues by saying, so, I'll give you an example. Think about an avocado. There are potentially pathogens on an avocado, but you wash the avocado, right? The avocado was washed after it's harvested. But what if that avocado could be infected, somehow falls on the ground and hits a little rock or something, and just that little spot where the pathogen is pushed under the skin? And now you wash it, but you don't wash that little spot. And what if, as you put your knife into the avocado to cut it, the host says it hits that spot, and L says it hits that exact spot? So what do we do with this avocado now is after we wash it, we plunge it into boiling water for 5 seconds. This is called blanching. And it's not long enough to cook the avocado, but just long enough to bring the temperature of the skin and the area under the skin just high enough so that it would kill any pathogen that might be there. And we do this with lemons and limes and bell peppers and jalapeno peppers. It's a process that is very, very thorough. And the chance that a pathogen can survive through that is certainly near zero. So he doesn't make a 100% guarantee. He says we could get really close to zero. And what I love about that answer is he gives a very specific example of the measures that they're taking that are far more extreme than any home cook takes. I've made dozens of batches of guacamole in my home kitchen in my life. I've never once blanched an avocado to kill a pathogen, thought about blanching one. And so he makes the case that at his restaurants, as a result of this outbreak, what they are doing regarding food safety goes far beyond what anybody, or virtually anybody, would do in their home kitchen to ensure food safety in their food preparation. Number 8, the leading question. This is when a reporter buries a word in a question and tries to get you to bite or do something with that word that makes you lean back, much like the accusatory question. I'm going to show you a few examples of how you can seize on that leading question and flip it to your advantage. Example 1. The question, isn't it unfair to local businesses to impose yet another environmental regulation upon them that will drive up their costs? Well, you could see you being the person in the chair saying, no, I don't think it's unfair at all, and starting to get unnecessarily defensive. Instead, flip it. The accusatory word that they used there was unfair. So let's use that to our advantage with this answer. What would be unfair is asking taxpayers to pick up the tab for the small number of businesses who are affected by this regulation. What's fair is asking only the businesses who use this product to pay the tax. That's fair. So you use the accusatory word and flip it to have the opposite meaning of what the reporter's question suggested. I'll show you one other example. Question, the bill you passed last year was ineffective in curbing gun violence. What makes you think more laws would help solve the problem? Here, the key word the reporter used is ineffective. So let's flip it. What's ineffective is doing nothing. We see that almost every night when we turn on the local news and see yet another fatality caused by gun violence. It's quite effective to learn from experience and make improvements along the way, and that's exactly what we've done with this new legislation. Question 9, the false premise question. Let's say that you've had a product on the shelves of stores for years, and you finally have released a new update on the product. And what's really cool about this is the new product has a new safety feature that the last one didn't. Well, you get some cynical reporter, and the reporter says, well, it's great that you have this new safety feature, but doesn't that mean all of your other products, the millions of those products that are in the hands of consumers, are unsafe? So this is the kind of thing that I have seen personally makes corporate spokespeople very uneasy and sometimes leaves them really confounded with how they should answer that question. And I think the challenge here is to reframe the premise. The premise is, well, you have a new safety feature, that one doesn't, therefore that one must be unsafe. The flip to that question is absolutely not. What this is a choice between is a product that's really safe and a product that's really, really safe. This is a car that has a double set of seatbelts turning into a car that has a double set of seatbelts and an airbags. You've taken a product that's safe and you've made it even safer. And as technology improves, the only responsible thing to do is continue to improve the safety of that product. And that's exactly what we've done. So it is, again, not buying into the false premise embedded into the question and reframing what the reporter insinuated was an unsafe product into an entirely new context. Finally, number 10. This is one of my favorite ones. This was a question asked of the former head of Barclays Bank. And just to set the context here, this was right after the 2008 recession, the market meltdown. And one thing the public had no appreciation for, understandably, was heads of financial institutions making $30 million a year as people lost double digits in their retirement portfolios, as it seemed like the little guy was hurt by the decisions that bankers made, as the bankers and financiers continued to be rewarded handsomely for their efforts. So I just say that to set the mood for when this interview occurred. That was the public sentiment at the time. So when a reporter interviewed Bob Diamond, again, then the CEO of Barclays Bank, what the reporter did was frame Diamond's salary against that of the average Barclays Bank's teller. And the reporter asked Bob Diamond, are you really worth 1,000 times more than the average bank teller? Well, Bob Diamond started the interview pretty well, but by the time he got around to that question, he knew, his body language made very clear he knew he was caught. And he had this very awkward smile on his face. He let out a nervous giggle. It was clear that the reporter got him. He gave an incomplete answer. He kind of said, well, if that's, obviously this was not the answer he wanted to give. It left a terrible impression. Now, I know that there are people watching this who say the reason he struggled to give a good answer to this is because there is no good answer to this. And that's a subjective opinion. Maybe that's right. But for the exercise I want to go through here, I want to come from a different angle. I want to come from the angle, let's say you were Bob Diamond's media person, and your job was to come up with a good answer. What would you say? And to give credit to the readers of our blog, years ago I had posted this clip on our website, and you can find this, by the way, at throughlinegroup.com if you enter Bob Diamond. And I asked readers to weigh in with, what would you say? And they, of course, we have a lot of PR communications types that follow our website, so they have some very smart answers to that question. And what I did was I put together what I thought were the 2 or 3 best answers and kind of combined them to make one big answer. And the ultimate answer came out to something like this. Mr. Diamond, are you really worth 1,000 times more than the average Barclays teller? Anybody that's come into our bank and interacted with one of our tellers knows how talented they are. So on a personal level, am I worth 1,000 times more than any individual working for this institution? No way. But the reason why the board has decided compensation should be what it is for executives is because my salary is tied directly to performance. And if I do my job well, those tellers will have an opportunity to advance within the company more than they would if I didn't do my job well. So I think it is completely appropriate to be paid if my salary is tied directly to performance. And my obligation and charge is to help those tellers continue their ascension up the job hierarchy. So they may start as a teller, but they work their way up into management and have a career that lasts for a lifetime. Now, I'm well aware that there are people watching this webinar right now who say, come on, give me a break. But there's a separate question, which is, would he have created something of a viral moment if he had given that answer? And I would say no. So while not everybody would necessarily be satisfied with his answer to that question, the potential damage would have been far less. And I would maintain that rather than being a potentially damaging interview, it probably would have been one of those do no harm interviews. Maybe it would have caused some negative press for a few days, and then it would have been disappeared. It would have disappeared into the ether and been subsumed by some other media interview that was even less favorable within a day or two. I hope you've enjoyed learning about some of the 10 difficult questions reporters ask, and that you have some new ideas about how to answer them. I hope more than anything else, what you have is a sense of confidence that even what seems on the surface to be the most challenging question oftentimes has a better answer than you would think. And I want to leave you with one last thought along those lines. What I find is that when people live with these issues day after day after day, when they have conversations with their colleagues, with their management, and they understand the history of some of these very difficult issues, it becomes harder and harder for them to give these types of responses, because what bogs them down is the nuance, the gray area. What they say to themselves is, yeah, well, that answer might be 99.5% true, but there's that 0.5%, which makes it not a perfect answer, and they just weigh so much on top of the answer that it prevents them from giving what otherwise could have been a good answer. Sometimes pulling out of those weeds and being able to see the forest through the trees really helps people find those answers. And that's what I meant at the beginning of this webinar when I said that oftentimes the answer's been sitting there right in front of them the whole time. When you just ask that simple question, what's the real answer? I hope you will visit our website at throughlinegroup.com. We have a blog that's regularly updated with these types of media training tips and also public speaking tips. And if, of course, you ever have a need for custom or open enrollment media training or presentation training, I hope you will take a look at what we offer. Thanks very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of the Bulldog Reporter Virtual PR Summit.